LinkedIn is by far, hands down, the most effective way to get people to get on the phone with you that I have ever seen. The strategy with LinkedIn is you are basically building a media company so that you can advertise on that media company to your would-be customers. And if you can execute what we'll talk about right now, you will get more people on the phone with you than in any other outreach model that has worked in human history. People are weirdly supportive on LinkedIn. Reality is LinkedIn has placed the garbage time I spend on Instagram, Twitter, etc. It's the same dopamine hit, but I can rationalize it because it's helping grow our company and grow my career. One of the mistakes I see a lot of people make when they start posting on LinkedIn is either one, they have no idea who they're posting for and they're just posting all over the place, or worse, they're just your posts are going to suck first. No one's going to read them. The idea of that is super embarrassing until you realize that if no one reads your posts, the only one that knows about that is you. There's no one trade publication that if we got an article in this, everyone would read it, but they're all on LinkedIn.
I don't agree with that. Welcome to this episode of the Connection Accepted pod. I'm super excited. Today we have Noah Greenberg on pod. Noah, thanks for coming on.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So Noah, just to kick things off, for the audience's benefit, would you mind just giving a quick high-level background on who you are and what you're working?
Yeah, I'm Noah Greenberg, currently founder and CEO at Stacker. I founded the company about 8 years ago. We do about 10 million in revenue now, helping brands distribute their editorial out to news outlets. I just passed 10 million in revenue and have the past 2 years really been playing around with LinkedIn as a way to drive business for Stacker and found a lot of success there, a lot of value there, as well as kind of unexpected value as we can get into.
Can we go back to maybe right after you graduated college? Tell us about that experience and how that eventually led you to even deciding, hey, I want to start.
Definitely. So I always enjoyed starting things. In high school, I started a DJ business. We weren't making music, but we basically borrowed $3,000 from our parents, bought big speakers and 2 CD players, and we're doing high school dances, Sweet 16s, etc. I knew I was eventually going to start a business, but I got an internship my junior year of college at a startup. The startup started blowing up. I got a full-time offer there when I graduated, when we were about 20 people. And I knew, look, I'll eventually start something, but I didn't have the idea then. So I started working at that startup. It was called Find the Best and then rebranded as Graphic. I got to spend about 6 years there, which was an incredible experience. Just, I think the best jobs for people fresh out of school are either working at a really small startup or in management consulting, just because in both of those, you are given way too much responsibility. And a couple of years later, if you dive into it, you learn more than I think you would kind of somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. So I went the startup route, but actually one of my co-founders went the management consulting route for his first 2 years. And I think we actually complement each other very well. But I worked at that startup for 6 years, can get into specifics if you want, but was, thrown into the deep end, learned a lot, made a lot of really incredible relationships that, again, I don't think I would have if I joined a 500 or 5,000 person company. That company got bought in 2017 by Amazon, and my team was deprecated. So basically, yay, we got bought. My team pulled into an office and said, hey, work here. 3 other people on my team decided to start Stacker, and that was in the summer of 2017.
Wow. And were those 3 other people also?
We were all at Graphic. So it was nice. We all worked together. We all knew each other's kind of strengths, weaknesses. We had a little bit of chemistry already. So it definitely helped us hit the ground running.
What were some of the skills and relationships you learned at Graphic that helped you build Stacker?
I think first was selling to people 30 years older than me and being comfortable in a room with people way more senior, way more experienced, way more executive. I was 22, 23 in a business development role, basically tasked with go work with, X type of company. All of those companies were in New York. So as a 22, 23-year-old, I was flying out to New York, convincing, people in their 50s to sit down with me and take a meeting, and then sitting down with them in my, Nordstrom Rack blazer and, playing adult basically. And I think you do that enough and you A, start to gain confidence, B, start to gain just some presence, and C, start to gain just kind of the know-how of what it's like to sit down in person. I think one of the biggest shames of people, we have people on our sales team that have came of age, if you will, during COVID, and they just don't have the in-person muscle. And I think that's a really important muscle as we get farther away from COVID. But so the first thing was just kind of taught me how to and gave me the confidence to pitch to people way more experienced than me, way more senior than me. 2 is I think it helped me understand how to operate in a company. or how to operate a company, right? So it was funny. I had a friend who started a company right out of college, and I was at this 20-person startup that, over the next 5 years, he grew his company to 20 or 30 people. Really incredible. The company I was at grew to about 100 people because we were venture backed. He was constantly calling me saying, like, how do you convince people what time they should come to the office? Like, just like as a 22-year-old, you've never worked in an office.
Right.
And there's all these things that I think I was just taking for granted of like, oh, I'm learning how office culture works. I'm learning how to set goals and how to, manage a team. I got to, at like 24, I was managing a team of 5 interns. And then a couple years later, managing a team of, I have 22-year-old. So I learned, I got to learn how to manage people, how to set goals with the team, et cetera. And learn by making a lot of mistakes. So when I started Stacker, I had a lot of know-how of like, oh, this is how a company's run. This is what I liked about how that company operated. This is what I didn't like about how that company was operated. And that would have been much harder if I'd started at 22.
The more you're talking about your startup experience, the more it sounds like a management consulting experience too. Like, I'm sure you can talk more about this, map. The way even like you're managing an intern or you're traveling a lot. The same experience. I'm sure you went through that at BCG.
Yeah, I mean, no, and I saw your recent post about like the different stages of the career and sort of like what you think people should be focusing on. And I think it was like maybe ages like 20 to 24. That early first job out of college stage was either, join a stage startup or get experience working at a management consulting big company. Just like getting thrown into the deep end with way more responsibility than you deserve, I think is what you said. And completely agree. I think back when I was in school, I definitely saw people who also tried to start companies right out of college. And some of them, granted, are very successful. But for me personally, definitely wanted to get some of that hands-on training, just learning from people who had been doing it for so much longer and getting thrown into those tough situations. So I think it's definitely set me up really well. And I've learned a ton about managing people and dealing with teams and things like that as well.
Yeah, I think like in both, one of my co-founders, he did 2 years at Deloitte before kind of entering startup world. And from what I've heard from friends that have worked at Deloitte, at Bain, from friends that have worked at startups, let's call it like less than 50-person startups, is in both roles at 22, 23, you're basically just told like, go figure this out. You get a lot more training in management consulting, but in kind of both environments, yeah, you get way more responsibility than you should be given at 23. And it's a little bit of like fire or die. And 2 years later, you have learned a lot if you decide to stick your head down and figure it out.
100%. I do think one thing that's interesting about the startup environment that's different from, say, management consulting is I do feel like at a startup, you're probably getting more exposure to like very chaotic, unstructured situations where you kind of have to like almost come up with your own approach or your own solution, whereas the work in consulting could be more scoped out. And I've heard from friends at maybe more early stage startups that like you're wearing multiple hats because there's many different jobs that need to be done. And so people will.
It's a good call out. I mean, I think one of the things you probably learn if you spend a few years at a startup is like there are ups and downs. And, in management consulting, assuming you work at a really big management consulting firm, you see ups and downs in other people's companies, but like you're never stressed if we don't hit this goal, I may not have a job in 6 months. And so I do think, in Stacker's 8 years, we've had a lot of ups and downs. We've had incredibly fun times. We've had incredibly hard times. Probably easier to weather those because I saw it happen at other companies. So I think that's that's definitely a good call out. The reality is though, I am awful at PowerPoint and spreadsheet. Everyone that goes through management consulting is incredible to my knowledge. And I do, there's something to be said for being able to tell a story and look really professional because of your Excel and PowerPoint skills. Again, I'm really glad I didn't go into management consulting, but it's been phenomenal having a partner that at the first 2 years of their career becoming a slide model.
That's hilarious. Yeah, we are very familiar with slides in Excel.
It's a really valuable skill. Like I make fun of it, but it's incredibly valuable.
My preferred medium is, of course, LinkedIn posts as opposed to, but that may not be. But before we get there, I think it's a good point to transition to Stacker. So what does Stacker do?
So today, Stacker is a platform helping connect brands who are producing content and looking for more distribution for that content and news outlets that are looking for great vetted content that they can fill coverage gaps. So we source content from hundreds of brands, charge a flat rate, contribute that content into the platform. We compile all of that into what we call the Stacker Newswire. If you think about Reuters is a wire for financial content, Associated Press is a wire for breaking news, current events, content. We essentially have built a wire of data-driven features, and we compile all of that and relicense that out to thousands of news outlets across the country. So a real life example is maybe Square from their POS systems has all of this data about how people are tipping. They might write a story on comparing all 50 states by how people tip for lunch. We'll take that story, make it available to thousands of news outlets. And when the Miami Herald needs an additional story on Sunday because they have a slow news day, they can run a story that shows that Florida ranks number whatever out of states when they tip, and they don't have to produce that story themselves. So we run that platform between the two.
That's fine. So, and yeah, before this, I was like drawing a bunch of diagrams on my notebook, but you explained it perfectly. You're serving as almost like a middleman in between the brands and the organizations, nonprofits, what have you, that want to put out a data-driven piece, and then the news outlets that they probably want to get in touch with, but maybe don't have all the relationships or the know-how, sort of like blending those two together. Is there a reason behind the more data-driven pieces that you guys tend to focus on, or is it something that, from your background, you guys more experienced with? Curious about that.
Yeah. So for one, readers like data. There's not a lot of trust in media right now, and data-driven content tends to break through the fluff a little bit. People like data, one, because it's interesting and it's facts and it's statistics, but also because data helps people compare themselves to other people. So you read that story, you see that headline on ranking all 50 states by how much people tip for lunch, and you want to know, where does my state rank? You want to know, where is that state that I went to college in rank compared to, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think data just allows people to add context to life. Beyond that, again, going back to our example, Miami Herald gets hundreds of pitches from different brands saying, take our story, take our story. And one of the value adds that we have for publishers is that we are taking in hundreds of pieces of content and vetting which of these are actual editorial versus which of these are just ads for that brand. And I think for the Miami Herald in that example, data-driven content tends to lend itself to not just being an ad for Square, because it's actual interesting information that only Square has. And I think that's really the trend we're playing into, is we're seeing that any kind of company does have really interesting data that they can tell stories from, that they are the only ones who could tell that story. So we talked about Square. We work with Instacart, who has really interesting data on like what types of groceries people are buying and when and in what locations. And, they can tell trends about how Americans are shopping. And I could give 100 examples of companies that have realized, we're sitting on this trove of data that no one else has, and let's hire journalists or statisticians and tell interesting stories from that.
Instacart's sitting on this trove of data. Are you helping them create the graphics that they're going to send to the media outlets, or are they hiring someone themselves to do that?
They're hiring someone themselves. We do help them understand what topics might be interesting to publishers. So as you can imagine, when we're distributing hundreds of stories every month to thousands of publishers, we have really interesting data on this type of story is getting picked up. This isn't. It seems like people are really looking for health and wellness content right now, or health and wellness content is no longer popular. And so we're passing that back to brands to help kind of guide some of their content strategy if they want to use it. But no, we're not producing the content. I think what we found is this huge trend where brands are going out and hiring the very journalists that used to cover their industry, or the economists that would normally cover their industry, and just saying, actually, we can be the news source.
Love that. And Daniel, I could sense you also jumping in here, because we recently talked with Peter Walker, who is head of insights at Carta. Love his content. Very, very data driven, as you know. And we're also going to be having a conversation in the future with Ara, who's the chief economist at Web. Yeah, I see that popping up left and right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I could give you 100 examples. It's really been incredible. I don't think this concept of every every company is a media company is definitely not new, but this trend of brands going out and hiring someone like an Ara or a Peter and really investing in, we are going to be a media company, and we are going to invest in really putting out a ton of really original and unique research, has definitely gained a ton of steam in the past few years.
When you started Stacker, what was your strategy to get the Aras, to get the Peters to put their stuff on Stacker so you can help them distribute it?
Cold outreach. I think, no matter what type of business you run, like, you're going to need to sell. My background was in cold outreach and sales. Again, like at a young age, I had to figure out how do I convince other people to take a meeting with me in New York. And we invested very little in marketing the first few years and invested very heavily in just us reaching out to a ton of people, getting them on the phone and figuring out how to get them to work with us. And that's, I'd say, I have a lot of weaknesses, but one of my superpowers is probably customer development, product research, and thinking about how do we, through talking with 100 people, figure out not just what the product should be, but who the customer should be. And so, yeah, a lot of conversations with people and a lot of kind of opportunity spotting and going after it.
Did you target the publishers, Peters first or the Miami Heralds, or both at the same time, or how are you managing that?
So as with any marketplace, kind of it's a chicken and egg problem. We decided to go for the demand side first, McClatchy newspapers, AOL, Yahoo, MSN, etc. So the publishers that we were distributing to. What we actually did to kind of seed the marketplace is we built out a newsroom at first. So we realized that we needed content. We built out a 10-person newsroom and started making data-driven content, and then went to publishers and said, do you want this? And then over time, once we had gained the trust and kind of built authority of a place that knew what good content, what engaging content looked like, we then went and started sourcing content from brands, brought that back to those publishers and said, if we were to integrate this other type of content produced from third parties, would you be interested in that? And they more or less said, can't promise you we're going to publish it, but happy to take a look. And then once the content was great, they said, yeah, I would love to publish this.
Can you talk a little bit more, and for the audience's benefit too, like when you say we started with building out our own newsroom, like what does that entail? Are you hiring like your own journalists?
Yeah. I mean, for better or worse, journalism is one of the few industries where the best talent tends to work freelance, or some of the best talent tends to work freelance. So, out of all businesses you could starting a newsroom is probably, one of the less cost-intensive businesses. So we started with freelancers. As we started to make money, we started to bring on full-time people, but it was a very gradual process over a while of, going out and finding freelance editors, freelance writers, working with them on what types of stories we thought would be interesting. And then once the flywheel gets going, it's easier to start upgrading to better talent.
So you're doing all of this cold outreach. Seems like it's pretty successful. At what point are you like, okay, we should start thinking about LinkedIn or content, generating more inbound, not just us going out and reaching out to people?
It was about 2 years ago. So basically, we were at a point 2 years ago where every time I got on the phone with someone, they would say, holy shit, I did not know this existed. We've been looking for something like this, but no one had heard of us. And that was partially because we didn't do any marketing, partially because we have been bootstrapped the whole time. And one of the times that you tend to get press is when you raise money. Also, because a lot of journalists in media and tech tend to only cover companies that have raised money just because it's kind of a stamp of approval. For better or worse, we had not gotten any press and no one had heard of us. And I was really frustrated with that. And I think the realization that I had in October of 2023 was basically every one of our would-be clients is on LinkedIn every day. There's no one trade publication that, oh my God, if we got an article in this, everyone would read it, but they're all on LinkedIn. Maybe not every day, but definitely every week. And I think that's true of pretty much any B2B company and a lot of B2C companies, depending on who your customer is the people that, you wish would read the press you got are on LinkedIn weekly. And so basically said, you know what, screw trying to get press. I'm just going to start writing on LinkedIn. And that was kind of the genesis of realizing we need to get out there. And there's actually this mechanism that we can just play around with for free instead of trying to get established journalists to write about us.
You decided to go on LinkedIn. Did you think about Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, or were you just set on LinkedIn from the start?
I was pretty set on LinkedIn. I think, hindsight is 2020 of why that was a good decision. At the time, my gut was just telling me, I think at the time I realized, like, the thing is, people have their job title on LinkedIn. So I could see, wait, all of my customers or would-be customers are on LinkedIn. Like, I can see their name and their title in the company. On Instagram or Twitter, like, not every VP of marketing says, I'm the VP of marketing at this company. So I think at first it was probably just kind of obvious, like, this is where the people are. In hindsight, why I think, as founders, if founders want to use social media to build more authority, more sales and pipeline for their brand, why I think LinkedIn makes sense is, one, your name and job title are attached to it. right? So like it is a place where people can see when you're reaching out, like I'm from this company. But more than that, I think when people are on LinkedIn, they're in business mode. Like when people are on Twitter, if you reach out to someone on Twitter about a sales call, it can come off as straight, just like people are not in work mode. Whereas I think on LinkedIn, people are just kind of like mentally in that work mode.
You're so right. I think we all just, when we're on LinkedIn, probably at the desk a lot of the times, we're in a different mindset than when we're scrolling TikTok or Instagram. So once you start posting on LinkedIn, what's your strategy there? Are you trying to connect with a bunch of people? Are you trying to post? Are you trying to make videos on LinkedIn or post on Stacker's account? What's your strategy?
So I guess to take a step back, what my strategy is I am trying to build an audience of my would-be customers so that over time I can advertise to them a la more posting on LinkedIn about Stacker. So I think one of the mistakes I see a lot of people make when they start posting on LinkedIn, if their goal is to drive awareness and or business for their company, is either one, they have no idea what they're who they're posting for and they're just posting all over the place, or worse, they're just posting ads for their company. And they're going out and saying, this is what we do. Look how impressive our product is. Here's a new feature launch. And everything that they post is about their company. And to take a step back, I guess like the strategy with LinkedIn is you are basically building a media company so that you can advertise on that media company to your would-be customers, right? So you are the media company. Like in my case, Noah Greenberg is the media company. The audience, aka my followers, are hopefully people that one day would buy from me, that the people that I'm trying to get on the phone with, I'm eventually looking to advertise to them. But if any media company just started if it was all ads, no one would subscribe to that media company, right? And so I think what you have to remember is you need to put out content that buys you the right to then advertise your company. And so my strategy is put really valuable content out there that's both interesting to me and interesting to my followers, but put actually valuable and interesting content out there. That's why people would follow me. And then once they follow me, then I have the right to advertise to them a la, look how great Stacker is, and get people to then inbound.
Because I pretty much just registered in my mind that that's essentially what you're doing for companies like Square too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of crossover between those two strategies in that I think, what's happened the past 10 years is the traditional advertising models have become really saturated. So Facebook advertising, Google advertising, there's just so many competitors out there. And people have just gotten really efficient in Google and Facebook advertising that it's become really hard to compete in those spaces that 10 or 15 years ago you could find new customers. And brand has become really important. Brand being, do people know who you are? Do they have a positive affinity and trust who you are? And do they respect you and look at you as an authority? And there's a million ways to do that. One of which is making it so that when you're reading the morning paper, people read about how your brand did really interesting research and are an authority for Square in the restaurant space. We talked with Lyft, who's a customer, and Lyft puts out really interesting content about, where people are commuting to and at what time and trends across all that. And I asked him, like, why are you investing so much in this? At the time, Lyft's editor-in-chief actually had been a journalist at Wired magazine for 10 years. They invested in a really impressive newsroom. And he said, look, we know that everyone has both Uber and Lyft in their phones. And if someone is reading their morning paper and they read an article that sources Lyft data, maybe they're 5% more likely to hit that Lyft button 10 minutes, when they need to go to work instead of the Uber button. It's just like, we just need mind share, right? And so to your point, exactly, I think, whether it's me posting on LinkedIn to build authority and affinity for me and a la Stacker, or Lyft and other public companies putting out journalism out for free so people read it, it's all in the name of building a brand and building trust with potential customers. And I think what makes LinkedIn really special is just there's so much data that shows that people buy from people, and that whether you're the CEO or founder or anyone else, you could be an SDR at a company, the people are just much more likely to get on the phone with you and buy your product if they know you, are familiar with you, and like what you have to say.
I just want to go back to that thing you said earlier, Noah, about how you have to almost like earn the right to pitch someone these days, especially with how much traffic and information is being dumped onto people through all social media channels at all hours of the day. Curious if I or someone listening was a founder and they're just getting started out with content, they know they need to do it. Maybe they've picked LinkedIn as a channel. What would be your advice for them about how to think about the content and the mix of that.
Just to make sure we can be as tactical or practical as possible, what is this person's goal?
Let's just say that their ultimate goal is to get people to buy from them, but they don't need this to happen immediately. They want to obviously warm up the audience, demonstration, thought leadership, so that when the time does come to make the pitch, the sell is a lot easier.
It's really important to consider who your audience is, right? And so that's why I wouldn't advise just, I'm going to build an audience, because like you guys have thought about, okay, for this podcast, like who is the person listening to this, right? Who would this be valuable to? And I would say, obviously if you are the founder of a company, then your goal is to meet, find those potential customers. But there's also examples of, I've talked with people who kids just graduating college and like their job or their goal is to find a job, right? And so their audience is potential hirers, right? And not just any hirer. They know that they want a job in this industry, in this role. And so let's just say I'm graduating and it's a dream for me to work in product at a tech company, right? Not even just any tech company. I want to work in product at a Series B size tech company, right? Then I think you should think about who are the hiring managers at Series B tech companies and what are they interested in, and post about that. So I think it's, if you just go on and you start posting, the same type of content is not going to be interesting to both of you, as well as my potential customer, as well as the hiring manager for an engineering role at Google, as well as et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe a different person is saying, I'm never going to want to get a job, but one day I'm going to start a company. I'm going to want to raise venture capital, right? Let's just say you're 19. You're like, that's going to be my goal. Is like, I'm eventually going to want to raise $100 million. Maybe you're building content saying, I just need like venture capitalists to follow me, right? But that's the content that's going to make a venture capitalist say, this kid's really interesting, is very different than all the other types of content we've talked about, right? So I think that's the most important first step, is getting really specific with who you're trying to get to be your audience.
100%. And I feel like that's like universal content creation advice, regardless of if it's on LinkedIn or YouTube or any other platforms. Is like, if you try to appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. Whereas if you have that very specific ICP or persona in mind, then the content that you make is much more likely to actually find those people and resonate.
Yeah, and look, this is a very specific strategy, right? So one of my favorite podcasts, My First Million, he talks about all the time of, I'm actually just creating content that I want to make, and the followers and audience I'm looking for are people that like what I like. And that's a really good strategy if you're trying to build a media company about things you're interested in. But if you're specifically have a goal in mind of, I'm trying to raise money, or I'm trying to drive business for my startup, et cetera, I think you just need to be more specific. So I do think, there's plenty of room for, I'm going to create content about this thing that I'm interested in, or I'm going to create content, as Mr. Beast has done, of just like, I'm going to make the most engaging content possible, and I'm just going to follow wherever will get me the most views, right? So there's different ways to do this. I think it's probably an important call out that if we get into what I would recommend as a kind of content strategy on LinkedIn or elsewhere, that this is I have a goal in mind, and my goal is to get, those types of people following me, so I can eventually get on the phone with them and have them, respect me, which is not necessarily the one size fits all strategy, but it's probably what you want if you're a founder or if you have a specific goal in mind.
And I love that you started with asking me what this person's goal was instead of just like jumping into it.
Strategy would be. And so, I mean, we can talk about it more generally, but that is, I think, the first question that everyone needs to ask themselves before they dive in.
I'm ready to dive into the specific LinkedIn tasks. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, let's get into the juicy details.
But I guess, what do you think is the best way to go at this?
So are we talking to someone that is starting from scratch and thinking about, how do I build a following on LinkedIn or like leverage the value that LinkedIn has to offer?
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't matter what the goal is. We're just going to go step by step. So I will start off by why I think this is important is, one, as we talked about, all of whoever you're looking for, whether it's venture capitalists or hiring managers or customers, they're all on LinkedIn. Beyond that, I have been in go-to-market outreach roles for probably 15 years now. And LinkedIn is by far, hands down, the most effective way to get people to get on the phone with you that I have ever seen. If you think about like outreach 1.0 was cold emailing someone, and you're just a random name and email address trying to convince someone to get on the phone with you. I'd say outreach 2.0 was like just DMing someone on LinkedIn, and you're no longer just a random email address. You now have a face, you have a title. Someone's much more likely to get on the phone with you, let's say. But outreach 3.0, I think, is you've posted on LinkedIn, that person has followed you, they know who you are. And then when you reach out to them, you're not even just a random face and name. You're a person that they say, oh, I know and trust what this person says. I would love to get on the phone with them. And if you can execute what we'll talk about right now the right way, you will get more people on the phone with you than in any other kind of outreach model that has worked in human history, I'd say. Okay, so how does that work? First is figure out who your audience is. And if I were walking someone through this, and when I do coach people through this, like, you got to get really fucking specific to like, who is one person? So what I recommend is literally picking a person, an individual, pick their LinkedIn profile of, if this person DM'd me and said, I'd like to get on the phone with you and learn more about what you have to say, you'd be like, I did it. Like, I figured it out, right? So you literally pick that person, print out their LinkedIn profile, or, put it up on a screen and brainstorm, what does this person care about? Okay. So you're literally thinking about, like, what is the type of content that they would be interested in, right? So maybe that's, prompts, or like, what do they want to learn more about, right? What are they curious about? What are they concerned and unsure about? What are they excited about? Like, what are the topics that if they saw content on this, they'd say, I'd like to read that, right? So, I think a really good, you guys, you said you talked with Peter.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, Carta and Peter is trying to get in front of startup founders, right? Peter is making content that is really interesting to startup founders. It's about, how much money to raise. It's about how much equity to give your employees. It's about companies that have gone out of business and why. It's like all this really interesting data that if you're a founder, like, you want to know those things, right? So that's a really good example of, Peter said, what's the type of content that founders would want? And he's going to create that type of content, right? So you're really thinking about what would be interesting to that person whose LinkedIn profile you just printed out, and come up with a list, right? And start to think about, what are topics within there that would be interesting, right? So hopefully now you have what is the inkling of some topics you might want to write about, right? What could be the start of a content strategy. What I would start doing then is start posting once a day. Why do you need to post once a day? Because your posts are going to suck at first and no one's going to read them. And at first, the idea of that is super embarrassing until you realize that if no one reads your posts, the only one that knows about that is you. So it's fine. No one is like, oh my God, did you see that post that Daniel posted that no one saw? Because no one saw it. So, so don't worry about that. Worst case scenario is people actually see what you're writing. So I would start posting once a day. And what you're going to do at the end of 30 days is look back, and you're going to sort on LinkedIn by what got the most engagement, and you're going to see what worked and what didn't. And then the next 30 days, you're going to do it all again. And you're going to say, it seems like this topic is really resonating. I'm going to try a bit more content, with that topic, right? Or you're going to say, it seems like this kind of hook or this type of post did really well. I'm going to try more in that area, right? And you're just going to iterate. And the reality is, because when I talk to people, they say, is it fine if I just post once a day? And just the reality is, if you post is it okay if I just post once a week? And at the end of a month, you're going to have 4 posts to look at the data. And if you post once a day, you're going to have 20 posts to look at the data. And the reality is just like, the rate of learning is going to be much quicker if you're posting once a day. Does it actually have to be once a day? No, but you're trying to kind of throw enough at the wall so that your learning can be more rapid. So you're going to start posting once a day. Where do you guys want to get into actual content strategy? Like, what would be helpful? So I'd say, in terms of the types of content, again, how I think about this is, I think 70% of your posts should be value add, right? So like, 70% of your posts, people, if you're a founder, they shouldn't know what company you're a founder of because of the content, right? It's not about your company. If you're looking for a job and you're trying to establish yourself, for potential interviews, it should not be about, this is my experience, here's this story, et cetera, right? 70% of your content should not be about you. It should be just interesting shit, right? What does that mean? That could be your take on a current event. Hey, this thing just happened in my industry, and here's my opinion on that, right? It could just be like something you learned and are teaching to other people. So right now, this year, a new topic that everyone's trying to learn about is GEO, or SEO for LLMs. My customers specifically really care about that topic and are trying to figure it out. So I've spent a lot of my time learning about that and then teaching people via LinkedIn posts. And that's gained me a ton of followers. It's my customers who want to learn about GEO And so they're following me because I'm posting about that topic, right? So those posts have nothing to do with, hey, here's how Stacker impacts your GEO. It's just, here's how GEO works, more or less. So 70% of your content, just value add. 20% of your content can be more what we'll call like milestones, more kind of subconscious advertising for you, right? So if you're a founder, this is, hey, we just reached this milestone. Hey, we brought these new customers on. Hey, we just launched this product, right? If you're looking for a job and you're in the job market, this is a story about here's the time, that I did this, whatever it is, right? And then I think if you have done the 70% of your content being actually adding value, then you've bought yourself the right where 10% of your posts can just be blatant advertising. Like, I'll do a post once a month. It's just, here's what Stacker does. We're looking for customers. If this is you, reach out. If I had just done that post out of the blue, it would be disgusting, right? People would unfollow me immediately. But because I've earned myself the right to do that. So I think when it comes to content strategy, posting frequently, constant iteration, looking back at what worked, looking back at what didn't, and just continuing to test, and making sure that you are over-indexing on content that adds value. No one has ever struggled on LinkedIn because they did too much value-add content. People have definitely screwed themselves by over-indexing on salesy content.
I want to get even more technical and ask some of your thoughts about other stuff on LinkedIn. So the first one is commenting. You are a serial commenter. How has that been for your growth? And should others be doing that too if they want to grow on LinkedIn?
Yes, you have to comment. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. Selfishly, commenting has been an incredible way to figure out stuff to post about. So a lot of the time I'll comment and I'll say, oh, it's actually a pretty interesting thought I have. And I'll turn that into a post, right? So being out there and commenting has been like a really good brainstorm tool for seeing what thoughts and opinions I have. And later we can talk about like interesting ways to figure out what you should write about and like what's in your head that you don't even realize you have opinions and thoughts and expertise on. But commenting can be one way to figure out what you actually have opinions on. The next is the way that the LinkedIn algorithm works is when you comment on people's posts, it makes your posts more likely to get more reach. So you're contributing to the platform, you are gaining, what Reddit would call karma, if you will. And I'd say, if you just go on LinkedIn and you post once a day, and a second person is posting once a day, but also commenting on 5 different people's posts, the second person's posts that they're writing are going to do much better. So, and this is not just smart idea, really love this post. This is like actually writing stuff that is engaging.
Right.
The third of which is commenting is a really good way to get onto the radar of the people that you're trying to turn into your fans and followers, right? So imagine I'm trying to get on the phone with the CMO of Wells Fargo and they post something about kind of how they think marketing has changed over the past 20 years, I'm making this up. If I go in and I give kind of a hot take, not disrespectful, but just like, hey, here's another way of thinking about this, etc., they're going to say, oh, that's interesting. This guy, Noah Greenberg, kind of an interesting thought there, right? I'm not like going to reach out to him the next day, but I'm now he knows who I am, right? And then 2 months later, he says something else and I comment. And in the same way that, kind of in the glory days of Twitter, people just like became Twitter friends. If I can become LinkedIn friends with the CMO of Wells Fargo, eventually he's going to say, wait, what the hell does Noah actually do? And he's going to look into my company and he's going to hopefully reach out. Or when I reach out to him, he's just going to be much more likely to get on the phone with me. Similarly, let's say you're looking for jobs. If the product manager at all these companies start posting and you're commenting saying, that's a really interesting take, but have you thought about this, et cetera, you're just on their radar. And so, commenting is a great way to insert yourself onto people's radar and come off as, hopefully, if you know what you're doing, a smart, thoughtful, interesting person.
When people talk about advertising, they say it takes 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever the number is times to close the deal, and it's similar. Like it might take 7 or 8 comments, and it's just one more rep of you getting in on the employer or on the potential customer's radar. Moving on from comments, have you experimented with newsletters or LinkedIn Lives or stuff like that?
I have not. I don't do newsletters. I don't do LinkedIn Live. I don't really do video content. I think that could be value in all of those. I think at the end of the day, probably rule number 1, if you're going to get on and start engaging with LinkedIn, is to do what you're comfortable with. Everyone says you have to do video, or, a lot of people say you have to do video, you have to do video. The reality is I'm not super comfortable posting a ton of video content. It's just not the brand I want for myself. That's nothing wrong with other people doing it. But I think you need to do what you are comfortable with. Otherwise, you're just not going to have longevity on this. Much more important to be consistent and do this over the long term than it is to have a flash in the pan of, oh my God, I have to do this type of content. And I will say, I have posted one video in the 2 years that I've been on LinkedIn, and I have gotten a ton of value out of LinkedIn. So you definitely do not have to do video, but you can and should if that's something that interests you.
Writing these posts, I'm curious because it's hard to come up with a lot of post ideas. Are you scheduling posts at all, or is it just you read something and you're just going in and writing right then and there?
I used to schedule posts. I don't schedule posts anymore because I no longer care what time of the day I'm posting. I used to, maybe it was 6 o'clock and I had an idea and I wrote the post and I'd say, I got to schedule this for 9:07 tomorrow. Now I just post it. But I do sometimes sit down and write 3 posts or 2 posts or 1.5 posts in a sitting. I'd say when I started, I had a 9 a.m. reminder on my calendar every day that just said post. And it was just a reminder of like, you're going to do this every day. And did I post every day at 9 a.m.? No, but like it was a check mark every day that I had to get into the habit of doing. But to answer the heart of your question, there are some days where I wake up and I say, what am I going to post about today? But there are other times when I have a Google Doc called Noah's LinkedIn Sandbox that I'm just throwing ideas into when they come up. And that Google Doc has 4 or 5 posts that I've actually written, but I'm not in love with them. So I haven't, posted them. It has one sentence that came to me in a meeting and I said, oh my God, I should do a post on this one day. And I've added that to the doc and one day I'll go in there. So sometimes when I'm feeling uninspired, I will go into that doc and see an idea I had 2 weeks ago. And again, we can get into all the ways I come up with content to write about. Sometimes I'm writing it in the moment. Sometimes I'm writing it beforehand.
I love that you have like a repository, and Daniel and I, we both also have our own sort of like Google Docs with a bunch of ideas. Daniel's probably got like 3 times as many posts written on there as I do, but that's fascinating. And the one thing, do you find that a lot of the ideas that you get come from just like you said, being in a meeting or an interesting conversation with someone, you think of something and then immediately you put it down, and then maybe later you revisit it and write a post from that?
So I think what's really magical about having that repository of a place that you throw ideas is it helps you get into the habit of identifying that could be a post, that could be a piece of content, right? So what started happening as I was keeping this doc and I was brainstorming, what could I write about, is all of a sudden I would be in a meeting with someone on my team and I'd say something and I'd say, oh, that was actually kind of an interesting thought I just had. I'm gonna write a sentence like I could flesh that out into a post later on, right? Or I'd be on a sales call and I'd just be bullshitting with the person about the industry, et cetera, and they'd ask me like, what do you think about this? And I'd answer and I'd say, like that's actually kind of an interesting thought I just said. That could be a post later, right? So I think you do just get into the habit. I'll be reading an article and I'll text a friend and say like, this is so wrong how they're thinking about this. And then I'll say, oh, like that's an interesting take that I have that could be worth sharing and, adding a little bit more color and thought to, right? So I think throughout your day, you do have a lot of really interesting, unique to you thoughts, takes, things that you actually are an expert on already and you just take it for granted because you've been an expert on it. And so I think the trick is figuring out how to pull that stuff out of you. Again, commenting is one way to do that. If you go comment on other people's stuff, you'll realize like, oh, I actually have all these like hot takes and interesting thoughts that I'm commenting with. But I think you just need to find how do you pull this stuff out of you, and having that, in my case, Google Doc has been a helpful way to prime my mind to identify those.
So you've got the Google Doc and you're ready to write a LinkedIn post. What's your workflow from taking one of those ideas then to LinkedIn post? Like, are you just going right in the LinkedIn text editor or using something else?
If you Google LinkedIn preview, there's a bunch of free websites that just show you how it actually would appear on LinkedIn. It's really important to think about what shows up above that more button and just like how it's formatted. So I usually work out of one of those, but yeah, I'm just like raw writing. Like I'm not using ChatGPT. I'm not using AI to write content. No, I think, I mean, we could talk for an hour on that, but no, I'm not using AI to write content. I'm just kind of going and having fun with it.
And after that first draft is done, are you just hitting post?
Yeah. I think, a lot of people have said, like, as I have gained a following, as you can imagine, a lot of people have given me advice that I should now start a newsletter. And I think the thing that scares me about a newsletter is just it needs to look more polished. And there's something about LinkedIn that like it's okay if it has a typo. It's a little bit more ephemeral. It's a little bit more casual. And I do post things with typos. Like, do I proofread them? Yes. But do I proofread and miss some typos? Definitely. So yeah, I mean, sometimes will I write something and say, this is a great post, not for today though, for one reason or another. Maybe it's because I have something else that I want to post about that day. Maybe it's, I have some opinions lightly on certain content that's better over the weekend versus on a Monday versus on a Wednesday. And so maybe it's like, this is a great post, but today's not the day for it. But for the most part, I'm writing it, I'm reading it once, and then I'm shipping it.
I'm going to send you after this. There was an interview that Stephen Bartlett did, Diary of a CEO, with the CMO of LinkedIn. It's unlisted on YouTube for some reason, but it was fascinating. And I was just doing some post about this. Stephen Bartlett's now pretty much putting typos in his post. He's like, the typos are back, and it's one way to
show people you're not AI. And I mean, to go back to your question, I mean, the reason I don't use AI is partially just because it feels kind of gross to me, and I'm not super happy with the output. I also have fun writing. Like, posting on LinkedIn has become a little bit of a creative outlet. The reality, though, is there's so much just clearly AI generated content that I think part of your job when posting on LinkedIn is to stand out and not look like all the other content. And that, having typos in there is one way to, have people know you probably didn't just type a prompt into ChatGPT.
It's pretty funny because when I'm reading your content, you'll break a lot of rules that some previous guests have, whether it's mentioning a bunch of companies that won't react to your posts or having typos. And are there some rules on LinkedIn that you like absolutely follow and like swear by, whether proven or not? They could be conspiracies.
I think like any algorithm, like Google, like TikTok, like Instagram, like the algorithm is constantly changing. And so what works really well today may be wholly different a year from now or tomorrow. But in general, things that I try and I think about are, I'm fine adding links to posts, but I try and never have the thumbnail show up at the top of the post. So, to get like really technical, you add a URL into the LinkedIn draft and it automatically pops up a thumbnail. You can X out of that. I always X out of that. I think that this is not proven with scientific data, but I think LinkedIn suppresses content that has that thumbnail. Whereas if you were to take a screenshot, let's say, of that thumbnail and include that, I think it would do better. A versus B.
Peter Walker had the same thoughts, by the way.
Great. I'm in good company there. I think, kind of coming off of that, because there obviously is a lot of debate over should you not post content with links in it. I think the my reality is LinkedIn just doesn't want content where to get the value, you have to click out. So, if you're just, let's say you're posting a job, if you're just like, here's a job and it's a link, not going to do well. Whereas if you are posting, here's a job and here's a bunch of interesting things about this job, and here's what this job, like the fact that this job is being listed, here's what this says about the industry, I think that will do really well. Why is that? Because at the end of the day, LinkedIn is rewarding, and by rewarding, I'm sharing and spreading content based on engagement. And the reality is, you post a job listing and it's just, here's a job listing. 1 in 10,000 people maybe actually is interested in that post, right? Just, it's a very small percentage of people who are going to see the content and say, oh, this is interesting to me, because all it is a job listing, right? So you got to be looking for a job, and the job has to be relevant to you. Whereas if you post that job listing and you say, here's what the fact that this job listing, the fact that it exists, here's what that says about what's going on in my industry, all of a sudden that's interesting and relevant to a much wider group of people. And when people see it, they're much more likely to engage with that content. They're going to click that more button. They're going to read it. They're going to spend time on it. And LinkedIn is essentially, they're showing a post to 100 people. They're showing a bunch of other posts to 100 people. And they're looking at what are people engaging with. And the stuff that people are engaging with, they're going to show to more people. And the stuff that no one's engaging with, they're going to say, this is not interesting. Like, I'm going to bury it, right? And so at the end of the day, you're thinking about, how do I get a wider group of people to engage with this? And I think that's why I don't include links and just as links.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic of links, and we've asked a few of our previous guests about it as well. Some people, I think there's more of a consensus that like if you really want to include a link, obviously make sure that the post itself has some value in it that people would want to read. And also you maybe just include the link as a comment that's pinned under the post as an option, to not have it directly in the body of the post. Because I think the way I think about it is LinkedIn obviously wants to keep people on the platform as long as possible. And so if there's a direct link or anything in the post, then they probably...
I don't agree with that. Again, I don't think they're trying to keep people on the platform. I think they're trying to show people content that people are engaging with. And if there's just a link, less people are engaging with it because they're just clicking off, right? So if it's just a link, maybe you're on that post for 3 seconds. Whereas if it's a link with a bunch of text, maybe you're on that post for 30 seconds. And when they're comparing that 3 seconds versus 30 seconds of engagement time with the post versus all of the other content on LinkedIn, that 3 seconds is nothing. And LinkedIn just assumes this is a useless post.
I see. So for you, the main metric is the time spent on it.
It's how much, or people, are people commenting? Are people liking it? Are people spending time on it? But are they engaging with it, which has a broad meaning? But that's the only thing LinkedIn has to go off, right? Are people interacting with this content? And if people are spending very little time on it, or again, just seeing a link and having no reason to interact with the post besides clicking on the link or not, I think they're just more likely to just scroll past it.
Noah, if you were the CEO of LinkedIn today, like what is something that you might want to change about the way that the platform is?
I come at this with a very specific perspective, a founder of a B2B company. I think there's an opportunity there's a lot of companies that have popped up that basically help you scrape LinkedIn, help you like automate messages on LinkedIn. I think there's an opportunity to kind of produce like a CRM in LinkedIn. There's a lot of people using LinkedIn more or less as their sales channel, and third-party software companies have popped up to basically be your CRM for LinkedIn outreach. And that feels like a huge miss for LinkedIn, both because those are shitty experiences and B, because I'd rather do that in LinkedIn. So that feels like a really big opportunity. The other piece, selfishly, is I would not let video take over the platform. I think that, the past couple years we've seen video kind of, is it going to be really big? Is it not? It's kind of waxed and waned. Fear is that video content is going to monetize much better than any type of advertising or any other type of content. And that's a really slippery slope, because once you get that advertising revenue, it's a hard thing to turn off. I think that what's really special about LinkedIn is that it's not just all video content, and that it's a place that people are sharing interesting thoughts and writing. So I would not kind of be by video advertising. And then third is just really thinking about how do you make this a place for building your career and continuing to lean into that. I think especially with video content, like there are plenty of like more classic influencer style content of just like stuff that selfishly I'd rather just keep on Instagram. And LinkedIn does not need to be a place where you're selling your business or but I think it just like anything that has a bit more of that professional angle, I would try and keep it in that realm.
Talking about monetization, I think it's like a very controversial and interesting thing about LinkedIn. How do you think about monetizing your content? As CEO of Stacker and founder, like it's very hard to track. You can't just say this post got me Lyft as a customer. How do you think about tracking it when, there are a million other things you can do in a day, but it's obviously reaped so many rewards?
Yeah. So, I mean, part of it is I'm not just posting and then waiting for people to reach out and say, hey, can we work with you? I'm posting and then I'm pairing that with, a lot of DMs and or just like kind of engaging with the people that are engaging with my content. The reality is we have driven hundreds of sales calls or booked hundreds of demos over the past year as a very clear result of LinkedIn. And that started by me kind of actively reaching out and saying, hey, I saw you engage with this post. I'm from Stacker. Would you want to hop on the phone? It's very clear. There's ROI there. And over time, I was doing posts where I'd see like 10 of our ideal customers would comment on my post. And it was like, okay, like this is, we would be paying money to do this in another marketing method, whether it be to get press or etc. So like people are interacting with Stacker content and the brand, and that's really valuable. And again, 3 months later, getting on the phone with that person and saying there's no way we would have gotten on the phone with them if they hadn't engaged with that post. I think what you can do is you can set up when people fill out a demo form on your site or a lead form, have an option like, where did you hear about us, right? Have your sales team, when they get on the phone, just ask. Like I will tell if you ask any of our salespeople, they once a day are slacking me and saying like, just got on the phone with someone, they follow you on LinkedIn. And I think you can just ask, right? And look, the reality is if you start asking in the first 3 months you're posting, no one's going to say, well, I saw you on LinkedIn. But I promise you that if you do this daily in a year, people will start saying, I follow you on LinkedIn and that's why I wanted to get on the phone. So I think one is asking. And then the reality is over time, you will start to get inbound if you're doing this right. And so it's one of those things where, if I have 5 people in a month messaging me saying, I follow you on LinkedIn and I'd like to learn more about what your company does. Can I get on the phone with someone? You can imagine that if 5 people are literally willing to raise their hand and say that there's 20 other people who, are just filling out the form and not explicitly saying that. So a few different ways.
On the topic of DMs in LinkedIn, I love that you mentioned that, you're getting inbound obviously because of the content, but also when you do reach out to someone, they're more likely to convert if they've seen your content. How do you, or maybe your sales folks, if they're also DMing on LinkedIn, how do they approach that messaging process of eventually getting someone to say, fill out the form to book a call?
So I think the ideal way to do this is you connect with someone, and that could be you sending a connection request or them sending a connection request, but you're connecting with someone, they're accepting, hopefully. You are waiting about a week, and then you're messaging them. Why? When you get a new LinkedIn connection, LinkedIn tends to show you their content, right? This happens on all the platforms, right? You follow someone new on Instagram, all of a sudden your entire feed is just, their last 20 posts, right? So when you have a new LinkedIn connection, it shows you that person's content, right? So what's happening is you're sending a connection request to this person that eventually you would like to get on the phone. Hopefully they're accepting. Over the next week, your posts are showing up and they're being kind of socialized with who you are, right? They've now seen your content a couple of times. Now, when you reach out, you're not just that asshole who sent a connection request, you accepted, and they're like, thanks. Would you like to get on the phone with me? You built credibility, right? Best case scenario is you're actually waiting a month, right? You're like sending a connection request. Now they're just in your ecosystem and they're seeing what you have to say. And then one day you're reaching out and saying, by the way, I think like our product would be really interesting for you because I've been following you and I see what you're doing, right? So there's definitely kind of levels to how much you're going to finesse this. I kind of go both ways, right? So I do probably once a quarter, I will have a week where I just say, this week, all I'm doing is dedicating my time to how many calls for our business I can set up on LinkedIn. The week before that week, I send a ton of connection requests, just cold connection requests, because again, a week later, once I'm in outreach mode, hopefully 50 of them will have accepted my request. And then that week I'm just DMing and I'm not automating AI messages because you are going to get a really good response rate if you actually write the messages and you personalize them a little bit. I get about a 25% response rate. When someone has accepted my content accepted my request, and then I wait a few days and then I send a DM, about 1 in 4 times that person will say, sure, I'll get on the phone with you. Which is again, just like I have never in my career had numbers or seen numbers like that. There are certain people where I'll say, you're a perfect customer. You're not getting the same kind of mass treatment for the 50 people I reached out to in that week. And I'm playing the long game. And I'm saying, you are the SVP of marketing at Yelp. I know you would be an incredible customer and I don't want to blow it on a cold DM 3 days after you followed me. So for that person, I'm commenting on one of their posts. I'm posting and maybe tagging their company. I'm commenting again. I'm seeing that they liked one of my posts. And then when I feel like they are ripe, I'm sending them a DM. And I'm much more likely to get a response than if I just cold DM.
So to me, the follow back thing in connection almost reminds me of Instagram in like the early days where everyone followed you on Instagram you'd follow them back. And I'm curious because I mean, you've had some periods now where your head's down on LinkedIn and it's really paid off. How much time are you spending on LinkedIn now per week?
So I'd say I'm at least spending 30 minutes per day. And that's I'd say I put 30 minutes towards like drafting a post / commenting on, a few posts, right? Is that a 30-minute block? Sometimes is it 10 here, 10 here, 10 here? Sometimes. But then I'd say there's days where I spend an hour because I'm sending a bunch of DMs. There's days where I actually spend 0 time because I was really busy. Like this isn't like a religious, I cannot spend a day where I don't post on LinkedIn, but I'd say for the most part, I'm spending at least a half hour a day. And the reality is like LinkedIn has to an extent replaced the garbage time I spend on Instagram, Twitter, etc. It's the same dopamine hit, but I can rationalize it because it's helping grow our company and grow my career. So the reality is like I used to spend 45 minutes a day on Instagram. I now spend probably 10 or 15 minutes a day on Instagram. I've moved that 30 minutes over. And so I'm actually probably spending an hour or an hour and a half on LinkedIn because when I'm on my phone, sitting on the bus, maybe I'm like commenting on some LinkedIn posts or I'm like responding to a DM. It's become a little bit of just throughout my day, but I'd say I'm spending between 30 minutes to an hour a day.
That's so funny because Daniel was texting me the other day saying that his LinkedIn usage has pretty much replaced a lot of his Instagram short form usage?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is I had not really posted on any social media for many years before I started using LinkedIn. But very quickly, it was the exact same emotion or again, dopamine hit as when I used to post on Instagram and how many people liked my content. Oh my God, like that person liked my content. And you just get into that same addiction. It's just easier to rationalize the addiction when it's like for me personally, and other people may feel differently, but like I much prefer that people are liking what I had to say than I would feel about like 100 people liked my shirtless pic at the beach. And so it's kind of fun saying, oh, I get the same dopamine hit, but it's actually for like an intellectual reason.
Right. And there's like impact.
Yeah, and I can rationalize this because at the end of the day, we've driven millions of dollars in business for Stacker through it. I mean, when I started, definitely had a lot of people that you connect with someone on LinkedIn in high school and you forget that they follow you. And I had people, I went to a wedding and this guy I went to high school with was just like, dude, you're posting on LinkedIn a lot. Like, what's going on there? And at first I was self-conscious, and then I just realized I'm not posting for him. And I told him, I was like, actually, I'm just not doing it for you. So like you should unfollow me unless you like what I have to say. I think the reality is there's people in my professional world that I wouldn't want to see what I posted on Instagram because it's not for them. And there's also people in my personal life that it's not that I wouldn't want them, but it's like a little cringe if they saw what I'm posting on LinkedIn because again, it's not for them. And I think this goes back to thinking about who is the audience that you are posting for is really important.
That brings up a pretty interesting topic, and I'd love your thoughts on just like authenticity, because when it comes to content that I think really stands out on LinkedIn, humor is one that I've noticed kind of pops out on the feed because not many people are posting jokes. Super high value posts also stand out, but then authenticity, I've noticed as well, tends to perform or at least get a lot of engagement. What are your thoughts on that? There's probably a spectrum, right, of like what's acceptable.
What do you mean by authenticity?
Posting more about personal things, maybe not specifically personal life, but maybe like the inner thoughts of a founder, not just the highlights, but also some of the challenges, things like that.
Like, I think your post about being a DJ, I know this is like a throwback one, but like that was authentic to me. If like that's what you're going at, Matt.
I mean, look, for one, I think people are interested in stories, right? People are interested in getting to know people. Same reason people like social media, same reason people watch reality TV is people are just like curious about other people's lives, right? And people's lives is broad. It's the job I had in high school. It is this problem I had at work, right? But there's one piece of content which is like, this is what's going on in our industry, and there's another one that's here's a story about a really hard time I had with a boss. People are kind of genuinely curious about other people's lives. And, there's a spectrum of voyeurism to genuine interest or healthy interest. But I think that's one is people just, are interested in people's stories and people's lives and getting to know people. The second is I will say people are weirdly supportive on LinkedIn. We just like Twitter obviously had a stigma of just like trolling and negativity, and people are strangely just there to cheer other people on. It almost seems sycophantic. Like I get like yesterday I posted I did a roundup of all the customers that Stacker brought on in Q3, right? This was it's the 20% milestone post, if you will. That post got 20,000 views and I added 50 followers yesterday because of the post. So through the new tool where you can see like how many followers because of a post. And that blew my mind. And that happens all the time where I'm just like, why do these people care? Like these are people that are not in my industry and they're just commenting and they're like, good job. Awesome to see you guys are still crushing it. And that happens all the time on LinkedIn, right? Like I think you'll often see like there's posts like whenever someone says I got a new job, hundreds of people will like that post. It blows my mind. Again, it's like if there's worse things to be strange and unexplainable than that everyone's just really friendly and supportive. But I do think that's one thing that drives into it. Yeah.
So would you recommend as part of the content strategy that we were talking about, if I were a founder looking to build my business, is it advisable to be posting a fair amount of that personal, authentic content, or maybe it's just only one post?
Again, I think it goes back to doing what you're comfortable with. So people have definitely advised me, Noah, you should be making more personal content. And I would say I under index on, versus a lot of people that have gained tens and tens of thousands of followers in terms of the amount of personal content. I think that's one, because I'm less comfortable with it. And there's been certain things where I drafted a post trying to be more personal. And then I looked at it and I was like, this isn't what I want as my brand. At the end of the day, you have to remember that like you're building a brand, and every single post that you put out there is one, grain of sand towards that brand. Now, something might get 1,000 views, and maybe that's a few grains of sand towards your brand, but essentially everything you're putting out there, that corpus of posts, is you. And you need to think about, what are you comfortable with having be you? Do I think that personal content can be super helpful for expediting or accelerating everything we've talked about? Definitely. People like to buy from people that they feel like they know, right? It's the reason that anytime a Kardashian launches a product, people buy it, right? It's not because it's like, oh my God, it's the best product ever. It's like, I like that person. I know them. I want to buy their thing, right? And that's partially because for a decade, people have just been like looking, again, like voyeuring into their lives via a TV show. So do I think that you can accelerate these strategies by being a person that people know? 100%. I think it's just important to call out that it can equally work the other way, right? So there's also stuff that you could post that is personal that turns people off and makes someone say, God, I thought I liked that guy, but that's kind of weird, right? Or like, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, right? And there's a million. That could be political. That could be you just posted a shirtless pic on LinkedIn, like you see every now and then. And it could be that you're just that person that's like posting way too much, way too personal, without getting into it. And so I think it's just important to remember that it can go both ways.
It's so funny because the more you say this, it describes to me almost what like a local journalist does. Like they don't get that personal. They're just putting out the content, and that's a lot of what you see. Do you see as Stacker evolves, and I haven't done the most research into local news, but is local news still growing? Do you see a future where there's like a stacker for, distributing on podcast or even LinkedIn post and other newsletters like that?
So local news is definitely facing a lot of challenges. And we could have, again, another hour on that. There's a lot of people trying really interesting solutions to save local journalism, to try and make local journalism work and be sustainable. And there's also, unfortunately, a lot of local news outlets that have shut down, are shutting down, may shut down over the next 5-10 years. I don't think local journalism is going anywhere. I think people are making it work with different models. Is it going to look like it did 20 years ago, 5 years from now? Definitely not. But as many kind of bummer stories there are that are saddening about what's going on with local journalism, I think there's also a lot of reason to be optimistic of people making it work, even just at kind of hyper local scale. With that said, if I think about Stacker's distribution, since most of our distribution is today via digital online news, whether that be local news, whether that be sites like Yahoo or MSN, etc. I think if you fast forward 5 years and that's the only place we're distributing your content, we will be heavily behind the 8 ball. Where people are getting news today is YouTube, TikTok, not really LinkedIn, if I'm being honest. But the reality is, like, people in their teens and 20s are not reading as much online news. It's not just local news. It's that they're getting their news from a YouTube broadcaster. And I do think, and we are thinking already about how we help brands take their research, take their editorial and journalism, get in front of those people. You go back to that Square piece we talked about and how much people are tipping. There's plenty of YouTubers talking about small business, talking about the restaurant industry, talking about a lot of things that would be really interested in saying, oh my God, Square just dropped this report. You won't believe which state tips the least compared to everyone else, et cetera. And it's our job to figure out how to help Square get that research into that person's hands. Just like today, it's our job to help Square get that research onto the Miami Herald.
Yeah, I honestly think even another like almost ancillary product you could do is, I don't know if you thought about this, but almost like an ad network too for these local journals. Maybe I don't know what it would be like, but like I feel like an upsell. Like, you write about this and maybe you can write an ad about them too, even for the content creators, because these journals and content creators probably need more streams of revenue.
Yeah, definitely.
We're going to ask you about being a top voice, what that was like, how you got it, and then we'll wrap it. All right.
So Noah, you're a top voice on LinkedIn, which means you got like the fancy blue badge. For the audience's benefit as well, you can't just get this badge. I believe it's invite only to get the badge. So tell us about how you got it and more about the process.
Yeah. So someone on LinkedIn reached out to me and said, I've been following you and I'm giving you the badge. It was that quick. It was not something I was going for by any means. And I probably a year and a half. I think that, if it wasn't even candidly on my radar, and I don't think it's really changed anything besides, I guess it looks legit, but I don't think I'm like getting more reach because of it. If I were to try and manufacture how to get that for someone else, like if your goal over the next year was to get that, is I think you need to get on people from LinkedIn's radar, right? Because they're the only people that can do that. How do you do that? Is post about posting on LinkedIn. So, I just, again, because I've been doing this and because I'm interested in this and because I'm curious, I do occasionally post about like, I've been experimenting with the platform in this way and this is what I found, right? Or I have this product and feature idea for LinkedIn and, what if it did this, right? And I'm tagging LinkedIn, and like LinkedIn product managers will engage with my content, right? And over the past year, I've both gotten a lot of people that work at LinkedIn now follow me, but also I've gotten on the phone with probably 3 or 4 different people on the product and product marketing team at LinkedIn, because it's their job to make LinkedIn better for people like me using it. And so like they want to get on the phone with me as well. And I think like to become a top influencer, there's way too many people on the platform where they're just like sorting. Let's look at people getting a lot of engagement and give them, I got the badge when I probably had 17,000 followers, right? So like I had a serious following, but plenty of people with 100,000 followers that don't have the badge. And you can't just do it by having a certain amount of engagement. And so what I would probably recommend if you really want that is you need to think about both how to be a top voice, quote unquote. Also, how do you get on the people that work at LinkedIn's radar?
Why do you have it?
I have it because I spend so much time on it and it allows me to see more profiles. If you're using it for sales, you kind of got to have LinkedIn Premium. I don't know if it helps me with my posting whatsoever, but it helps a lot with the kind of sales and DM pipeline.
I think so too. Some of the previous guests think that your posts get more engagement if you have premium. I'm not sure about it, but interesting thing to think about. Have you seen your reach go up a lot more now that you have the blue badge?
LinkedIn reach is so volatile that I definitely did not the day after I got it or the month after I got it say, well, here's a bump. So no.
I don't know if it was you that posted this, but it was interesting to see some post I recently saw about how you should track your growth is taking out the top third and the bottom third post and seeing how those middle do. Maybe it wasn't you.
But I agree. I think, the reality is like I have a post that got 700,000 views and added a few hundred followers. Like, would I like to replicate that? Definitely. Am I trying to replicate it? Definitely. But like if I judge my success by how many of those posts that I've been super unsuccessful because I've only had one in 2 years, I definitely think it's about that middle. Because again, this is something you're doing every day. And I think, this is kind of general, this is true of all media, right? It's not just, I had that one thing that did incredibly well. It's being able to show up consistently and have the average of your daily be good.
Is that your most viewed post to this date? 700,000?
It is.
Shocking, I feel like. For 20,000 followers, I'm shocked nothing's popped more for you.
I don't know. 700,000 is a lot of people.
I think is the largest one we've heard yet of 3.3 million.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, to me, 700,000 is a lot of people. I've never seen that many people. Like to me, it's wild that many football stadiums of people saw that 2,000 words that I wrote. But, again, compared to other social media platforms, that's a drop in the bucket. But yeah, that is the best performing post to date. And it was actually more or less 3,000 words on what we just talked about. It was about how the post was about, and you can learn a lot from this. It was a product we launched 2 years ago, just hit 3 million in revenue. If I were to start over, here's how I would get the first 10 customers and build the machine to get the next 100, which then I talked about that. But I think that as being above the more button, there's a lot you can pull from that around building authority and credibility. I built a company that, did 3 million in revenue, and then just people are interested in, wait a second, how do I do this? And that posted phenomenally well.
It's amazing. Last question for you then, Noah, is there anything we haven't talked about today that you want to tell the audience or that you want to chat about?
No, I mean, well, I guess I said no and then yes. Obviously, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Noah Greenberg, but also stacker.com if you're interested in learning more about the business. And really appreciate this. This was fun, guys.
We didn't cover that I should have said from the start, and that's that Noah and I are not related. Probably shock a lot of the audience. They're the same great last name, but are not related. And although it would have been really cool if Noah was from Louisville.
No, not related.
I'll make it out soon.
Thanks, guys.
I also are.
Cool. That's a wrap.